Buenas tardes.
Hi, good evening. Let's wait for these very last people who just joined us to take a seat. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us in this trip towards the Arab world in this Aula Árabe Universitaria. We start the year with this 8th conference of this cycle that is going to be given to us by Mohammed Ouhemmou, who is a professor at Zohr in Agadir in Morocco. And we're going to be traveling with him to the west of Africa to talk about the necrocorridor, African-Canarian Island necrocorridor. This is the Atlantic Mediterranean route, and we're going to be talking about the migration flows in the region and why is it called the necrocorridor, as well as the political construct and the mediatic construct that are part of it. So
No sé si el técnico puede... O Mar, ¿puedes cogerle los casquitos al profesor? Sorry, do you understand Spanish? No. Entonces, bueno, simplemente darle las gracias till Madrid to share with us your conference, and just wait a moment for him to have the interpretation. Bueno, pues nada, simplemente agradecerle por acceder a viajar a estar aquí hoy con nosotros, desde como decíamos, desde Agadir, y también por hacer el doblete, porque pasado mañana va a dar esta misma conferencia en Barcelona, ya que...
We thank him very sincerely for coming all the way to Madrid from Agadir. This conference is going to be repeated in Barcelona within the Aula Mediterránea program of the Mediterranean Institute, and that we are organizing this conference with them. We have a twinning program. The two programs work together, and oftentimes, or whenever we can, we share speakers, and we have the students of their program joining us. And in that sense, thank you very much because of this collaboration. We are happy to have Professor here. And as you know, this conference cycle, Aula Árabe Universitaria, is a cooperation exercise that we do with the different universities that we have in Madrid and other nearby universities. Also, the University of Córdoba. Students can come here, and we cover the topics that the students themselves and the universities suggest that they consider to be necessary for their academic programs. In this case, we have 12 universities participating from Madrid, Córdoba, Castilla-La Mancha, Granada, Segovia, Sevilla, and Toledo. And we also have the support of the new regional cooperation program with the Arab world from the Spanish Cooperation Agency for Development. And as you know well, the objective is to bring you and let you know about the different dynamics that are happening in Arab countries at all levels, or related with Arab countries with a multidisciplinary perspective, so we can enrich the different universities that participate in this program, in this Aula Universitaria. Also, this is an area for research and analysis with speakers coming from different disciplines, and we have students coming from different disciplines that they can see things from different approaches, and that's always very enriching. In this session in particular, we are collaborating with the African Studies International Master that has been collaborated with Aula from the very beginning, and this is the 7th year year that we do it. We have Marta Iñiguez, who is a professor and a coordinator of this master, and she will be presenting this conference and the professor. So thank you very much, Marta, for collaborating with us all of these years and for bringing your students to these conferences. And before giving her the floor so that she can start the session and give you an introduction of the speakers, I just wanted to remind you of a couple of things. As you know well, at the end of the course, those of you who have joined us in this trajectory on an ongoing basis will be receiving a certificate, the certificate of Aula Árabe Universitaria, in which we certified your participation. You have the passport that you got at the very beginning and is stamped every time that you come to the conference, and you know that it will be stamped. We stamped every destination in the passport so that at the end you can get access to the certificate of Aula Árabe, and you need to participate in at least 40% of the conference this year. It will be at least 7 and at least 5 have to be of Aula Árabe Universitaria and 2 of Aula Mediterránea, which is the program of IEM with which we have a twinning program. And you are a student at the Comunidad de Madrid. We ask you to come here face to face. That's why we gave you the passport so that you can have it stamped, and the ones of Aula Mediterránea can follow this through the streaming that we have online. And to register your participation online, you have a form at Canal de Casa Árabe in YouTube, in the channel of YouTube, where you can fill it in, and this will be validated so that we certified your participation. And that was all that we wanted to say. Thank you very much for joining us in this conference and for coming here, and we give the floor directly to Marta. Thank you very much, Olivia. It is a great pleasure to continue on collaborating year on year on this program, and it is a great opportunity to bring speakers here that otherwise will not be coming here. In this case, the proposal of Professor Ouhemmou, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, is based on a proposal of the Met, and I think that it is essential to put on the table the debate, in-depth debate of the migration policies. Professor Ouhemmou, since he did his doctoral dissertation at University Hassan II in Morocco, has been researching migration policies, first concentrating in the migration policies of Morocco with the clear contradiction that exists in trying to attract international students on one hand, and on the other hand, to expel part of the population, the migrant population, and that's what made him take a very deep look, a sociological look into the migration policies, looking at the racism that exists in many migration policies that had been highlighted by him when analyzing the migration policies of the EU and the migration policies of the Northern African countries. It is interesting also talking about migration because it's a hot topic right now in Spain, in Europe, and also in a moment in which it seems like we can only talk about migration from a securitization perspective. It seems like migration policy has become a reason to have threats, and it is a policy that is outside of the scope of the social sphere. It is more a policing sphere, and is not considered part of social justice policies, not to mention what's going on at the Caribbean and with the deaths that we are seeing in the Caribbean Sea with the current US policy. So for us, for the African Studies and International Relationship Master. It is a real pleasure to have here Professor Ouhemmou to come here. Thank you very much for coming, Professor. Thank you for telling us about your research in the Atlantic route from this perspective of the necro policy. Professor will be presenting his latest research, his latest publication, but he has many other publications. In fact, we're talking about one that is about to come here about the strategic ambiguity in migration policy. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to the professor, and I encourage all of you to prepare your questions so we can have a very fruitful debate at the end of this session so we can make the most of his staying in Madrid. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for the kind words and the welcome. Thank you also, Olivia. I would like to thank everyone here at Casa Árabe. It's my first time here in Spain, and it would have been almost impossible for me to be here without the wonderful support and help I've received through this migration or mobility process. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. So as both Olivia and Marta introduced me, my name is Mohammed Ouhemmou. I am currently working at Zohr University, which is a university, the only university in southern Morocco. We have more than 160,000 students from almost half of the country. So we are a university that covers half of the students in the country. So with regards to my research has always been about mobility from sub-Saharan Africa towards North Africa in general. And I am very much interested in exploring how different countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, develop different approaches to managing mobility or transit mobility from sub-Saharan Africa, either with regards to their own national and domestic politics or with regards to the larger geopolitical considerations they have, especially with the EU. My research, the research I'm collaborating with Professor Ricard Zapata Barrero, it's about the Canary Corridor, a new route that has emerged recently, we would say, in the late 2018. It's not new in the sense that it has been used since the early 80s by migrants, minority of migrants departing from Morocco, and a good portion of migrants departing from Senegal, particularly, and even as down as Gambia. But we found that this corridor has become very much interesting because there has been many incidents on almost weekly basis about deaths of migrants and accidents of shipwrecks and so on. So we decided to explore it using the concept of Akelim Bebe's concept of necropolitics. So that's why we call it a necrocorridor, and we call it We call it a necrocorridor because it meets a certain number of criteria. But before that, it's very important to explore a little bit of mobility or corridors corridors of mobility from Africa or within Africa in general towards the EU. And we can think of these corridors in terms of what I call imagined corridors and historical corridors and emerging corridors. And emerging corridors, we can give the example of the Balkan corridors, or the Balkan route that has emerged in early 2015 with the Syrian crisis, going through Turkey, Serbia, and towards Germany. So quite a corridor has emerged in the early 2015 and died probably in the early 20s, but it's still very frequently used. There are very much interesting corridors that we can also explore, which are corridors that take place through the use of different European ex-colonies or territories like French Guyana. Now there is a huge mobility of not particularly Moroccans, but Sahrawi Moroccans from the south of Morocco who do not exactly see that part of Morocco is that part actually belongs to Morocco, so they would go to Brazil, and from Brazil to French Guiana and apply for asylum there. So there are a lot of dynamics, but the mobility from the European perspective is most of the time is imagined in the famous Frontex map of, the Árabe invasion and, mobility, basically a whole block or a whole wave of people coming from Africa towards the EU. And my argument, or the argument that I always make, is it's much more about than that. It's much more complex. And of course, the sense of urgency is always there. Europe has its own sense of insecurity and sense of urgency, and the same as we do in Morocco. For example, if we look at the migration dynamic in Morocco or in North Africa in general, you look at Morocco, we are a migrant-sending country, we are a developing country. We have 10% of our population is a migrant in Europe. Part of it is in the countries of the GCC and Canada. 6% of our GDP comes from remittance. So we are clearly a country that is in no need for migrants. But if you look at really the context of the local economic context, you would see that it is much more than that, and the picture is much more nuanced than that, because high rates of unemployment, very extremely high rate, 15% rates of employment in Morocco, at least from the official record, with us Moroccan migrants were profiling very high in the irregular migration statistics, either by Frontex or many other border agencies, does not really dispel this need or the need of the Moroccan economy for labor. And you can talk about two particular sectors, which is the agriculture and the industry. Morocco is an agricultural country, and much of our production is directed towards the EU. And if you look at farms across Morocco, none of it is you would very rarely see Moroccans working in those farms. It's mostly, the workers are mostly from Sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at the construction sector, most of the workers are not Moroccans. Most of the workers are from Sub-Saharan Africa. You look, for example, at a country like Algeria. Algeria last year deported over 35,000 Sub-Saharan migrants to Niger and Mali. Huge operations of arrest, mass arrests, and deportation towards the borders. However, so from the perspective, you see that Algeria is not quite a developed country with a very high rates of unemployment, with a very high rates of migration towards Europe. But at the same time, if you look at the statistics of the Ministry of Interior, which are not very much mediated, you would see that there are over 90,000 Chinese migrant workers in Algeria, working in construction sector, while the Sub-Saharan migrants are being kicked out. So my point is that it's not about whether the economy needs migrants or whether there is an actual, the logic of the market necessitates that we need migrants or not, as much as it is about what kind of migrants, whether they are of the right color or not. So the same thing goes if we explore like mobility dynamics in the whole of African continent. You would say that 80% of mobility in the region remains contained within the continent of Africa. Very small portion of it is directed towards the EU. Yet much of the global debate is about that small 15% that takes place from the south to the north, from the southern shore of the Mediterranean to the north shore of Mediterranean. You look at, for example, the refugee crisis of 2015-2018, and you would be surprised that the largest refugee camps do not exist in Europe. They exist in countries like Kenya. In Kenya, you have a Didi camp, but Didi camp, it has like 250,000 migrants. There are two camps in the outskirts of Nairobi containing almost 500,000 of migrants. So if we look at the statistics and the discourse, you would see that the two things do not match. Of course, mobility within Africa is much more complex, and you would have very global centers of influence that would attract migrants within Africa. And it would be very much interesting to understand how the dynamics of migration from Africa towards the EU would change if you focus on how regional centers of influence are doing in terms of economically. If you want to understand migration in West Africa, you better understand, like, for example, a country like Cote d'Ivoire. If you want to understand in Southern Africa, you would understand the migration and the economic dynamics of South Africa, which is attracting most of the migration within the region. So my point is that the tendency, or in the global discourse about migration or African mobility being northward directed mostly, or being targeted only towards the north, is most of the time not correct. At the same time, the discourse that within Africa, the economic development does not really negates the need for migrants is not the case, and we can give many examples other than Morocco or Algeria. So, but I'm not interested in this route as much as I'm interested in the Canary route, or the Canary necrocorridor, or I call it necrocorridor, which is in the eastern or in the southern part of Morocco. Until recently, this part for many European countries has not been part of Morocco. It was recognized as the Western Sahara. Now with the Abraham Agreement, now Morocco has asserted its sovereignty on it. Of course, we have certain contestation between for example, you have the EU court ruling in 2018 recognizing that all fishery and agricultural products produced in that part called Western Sahara of Morocco should be excluded from the free trade agreement that Morocco has with the EU. At that time, the Minister of Trade and the Minister of Agriculture, who is now the Prime Minister, said that you either deal with Morocco as a whole, or you don't deal with it. And if the EU decides that that part is not an integral part of Morocco, then we're going to suspend our cooperation with the EU with regards to migration. That you put that on one side, then you look at the number, how in that particular period the number of sub-Saharan migrants and generally irregular crossings from Morocco towards Spain have quadrupled within a month. That tells you a lot about the weaponization of migration and the use of migration as a weapon to achieve certain geopolitical goals. And of course, there are multiple incidents on that regard in Morocco and in different countries, also in Algeria. So, but I'm very much interested in what's called the kamikaze migrants, these kind of migrants who, for reasons we might understand, take a very risky route. You have, on one hand, you have a very short, secure, historically established networks of support, networks of smuggling, that is the Mediterranean, all of them shifting the focus into a migration route that is risky, that is sometimes that can extend from 1,000 to 1,600 or 500 kilometers long, from a journey that extends from one day or a couple of hours in the Mediterranean to a journey that extends up to 6 days. And there has been cases that documented where migrants have stayed 8 days at sea before reaching the Canary, because most of the time they lost the navigation system and they get trapped in the sea for more days than they would count. So why would the migrants shift from safer, more established historical routes into this corridor, which is practically a death trap, which why we call it a necrocorridor. So a necrocorridor, according to our understanding and conversation with the available literature, is a corridor, is a mobility, is a migration corridor that is characterized by a systematic, predominant existence of that. And that is not the outcome of natural conditions. It is the outcome of public policy. It is public policies that are intentionally structured to produce mass death and mass murder. It is public policies that normalize with that. It is about public policies that use geography, that use weather conditions as tools to promote mass death. That's why we call it necrocorridor. And the Canary corridor, we particularly named it the necrocorridor because it meets a certain criteria that I'm going to explain. So the first one, we say that it is a necrocorridor, because it has high rates of that. If you compare the rate of mortality in the Canary route compared to any other route, it is 8 times higher. The rate of death in the Mediterranean is 1 in every 120. The rate of death in the Canary Island is 1 in every 30, and sometimes it is less than 1 in every 30, 1 every 10, so 10% of mobility crossings in that corridor results in that. That's without factoring in accidents that are not documented, such as what's called ghost ships. Then the second element, we said that it is this corridor emerges because of intensified systematic violence. And here we're going to explore 2 parts. The first part is the EU border externalization or border securitization policy, that is the closure of safer routes. And the second one, public policies adopted, or we're not going to call them policies, but security policies, practices that are adopted by Morocco, that in their essence what they do is not just curb entry into the European territory, but other funnel and herd migrants into dead zones. The second element, we said that these deaths are not random results. They are a result of a policy of letting die, a policy of systemic negligence, or minimal investment in rescue and safety and rescue operations that intentionally lead to higher deaths. And the last element, we said we called it a necrocorridor because it is based on, one is the normalization of that becomes so frequent, so untalked about, keep recurring in the media, that they become normal business, doing business. And the second one is, it's because it is based on the deflection of responsibility. A lot of time whenever there is a migrant death, either in the Mediterranean, and that was the story in the Mediterranean for a very long time, or in the Canary Island, a lot of time most of the default mode for Moroccan public officials is to talk about criminal network, is to talk about human traffickers who are pushing migrants into their death. But a lot of times, for example, if you explore, just go back to the case of Ceuta and Melilla, despite all the death that take place in those two routes, the Ceuta and Melilla, and despite all the death that take place, that it has been documented that there are no human traffickers in that particular, not even smugglers. And the reason why Sub-Saharan, particularly Sub-Saharan and non-Moroccans, use the Ceuta and Melilla route is because of this, because they don't need the network of smugglers to facilitate. It's simply the fence is there, and you have to choose the best time, best weather conditions to cross. So even when there is mass murder in cases like Ceuta and Melilla, where migrants die, the default statement for officials either in Spain or Morocco is that we are going to blame the human traffickers who are pushing the migrants into. So in this discourse of blaming, the responsibility of the state itself, the responsibility of the security agents who implement border control operations. There are many cases in Morocco where there has been where migrants died after they have, and it has been documented, after they have been beaten by security border control agents, and nothing has been done about that. The point, what happens next is that responsibility of the death of the migrants is deflected to an imaginary entity that does not really exist, which is human traffickers. So it is a necrocorridor in this sense. So when we talk about that frequency in the Canary Island, it's higher than any route. So if you look at up until the 90s, it was not very. It was used, it was established, but the route was used by sea-savvy individuals, people who know either fishermen, and it's very interesting that fishermen are very involved in this route, particularly from Agadir until Dakhla, in facilitating mobility, in facilitating migrants. So the role of fishermen shifts. Sometimes they are smugglers, sometimes they are fishermen, fishermen, sometimes they are even victims, because there has been a lot of incidents of piracy where fishermen attempt to assist. There are 2 documented cases of piracy even, where fishermen have tried to assist a migrant sinking boat, but the ship has been, or the boat has been hijacked and taken to the Canary Island. Another case was the boat was taken to the Canary Island, and this is a famous one, were then burnt. So the role of fishermen, it shifts between them being part of the border control operations, because they relay information to the Coast Guard about the need for rescue or even cases of irregular migration. Sometimes they themselves contribute to this. Sometimes they are also the victim of it. So that role is quite shifting there. But the key point is that death rate in this route is quite high, and it does not show a tendency to decrease. But what's very important about this route is that if you look at the Mediterranean route, what you have is, if you have fewer attempts of crossing, it means that you have fewer deaths. If you have like 100 crossings every year, then and you have a certain number of that, the next year you have 50 crossings, you would have half of that amount in terms of that. In the Canary Island, it's not the case. That is always high, either whether there is a high rate of crossings or not. That's why and this is the result of the extremely unfriendly and hostile weather conditions, and because of the systematic presence of assistance and rescue operations. And the second one, we say that it is a necrocorridor because it is, or the second element of why the Canary Island or the Canary Corridor is a necrocorridor, because it is the outcome of policies that herd migrants from traditional, pre-established, historical, well-known, well-facilitated routes into riskier routes. And this is very common, not just in the Canary Island. I have been in Addis Ababa some time ago, and there has been some research about European emergency funds. And the very important, the key role of the EU emergency fund is what they do is encourage settlement or discourage mobility. So they would go to African communities that are prone to mobility, are prone to migration, and give them training, a little bit of education, give them employability skills. But what the EU does through these programs is that the same programs that are designed to prevent immobility or to prevent migration and promote local development, what they do is that they funnel migrants to a second destination, and in this case the countries of the GCC. What the EU does through this program is give training, give information, training on how to write CV, information about job announcement, not job announcements in Europe, job announcements in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, and the Emirates. Sometimes they would even give some funding to facilitate the visa fees to apply for those jobs in the GCC, which is very interesting. So finally, the EU border externalization policy functions beyond just like making Morocco, making Tunisia a gendarmerie of Europe. It's much more complicated than that, and there are very interesting stories about certain villages in Morocco with regards to how EU border externalization functions. So we said that it is the emergence of the Canary Corridor is the outcome of this kind of policy, the blockage of the main Mediterranean route. Yes, it has been used very frequently by migrants, but since with the increased securitization, with the increased militarization of this, with the increased cooperation of transit countries such as Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia, these safer routes have been blocked. Therefore, migrants had to choose a second option. The second why, but this does not speak of of how securitization actually functions, and I'm very much interested in the differential implementation of the of securitization or border securitization in the Mediterranean. In Morocco, we have had recently cases of drones, of helicopters, of high-speed boats called phantoms, making almost daily ships or daily trips to Spain, transporting hash on daily basis, going for and for. And sometimes it's not just drones, it's not just boats, but whole helicopters, nothing of which is being detected. So I'm very much interested in how this securitization, which really represses migration to very low and minimum rates, is not being manifested the same way, was not being implemented the same way when it comes to drug trafficking. So we are not talking about the different implementation of migration policy itself with regards to different groups, but also with regards to different levels of security. The second element is regards to is why the Canary corridor has emerged is starting from 2018. Morocco since 2009, since the early 90s, started cooperating with the EU with regards to migration management. In 2003, we adopted what's called Law 0203 relative to the entry and exit of of foreigners into the national territory. Very interesting law. We had it at the time when we had the Casablanca terrorist attacks. So you could see the feeling that we had about the law. The law was created to regulate foreign entry and exit out of the national territory, but it was at the moment of fight against terrorism and so on. Very much, there are a lot of critique about this law, one of which is the so-called detention zones. For example, in Morocco, there are plenty of documented detention zones, but according to the law, we don't have, according to Law 0203, we don't have detention zones, we have welcome centers. And according to Law 0203, the duration of the welcome is not defined. You could be welcomed for 1 hour, you could be welcomed for a month. So, and those welcome centers or detention zones do not fall. One of the criticisms is that they are not under judicial oversight. They are not overseen by the Ministry of Justice. They are not overseen by the High Commissioner of Prisons. They are just there, run by the Ministry of Interior, which is very much known for its lack of transparency. But since 2014, we made a new announcement, very humanistic one. We decided that we are no longer going to be repressing migrants for the EU. We're going to change this policy. So we decided that to adopt what's called the National Strategy for Migration and Asylum. Morocco regulated the status of a couple of thousands of migrants. In 2014, it was like approximately 50,000, 40,000. Then we had a second phase where we regularized more in 2017, but all of this changed all overnight in 2018. In 2018, out of the blue, northern Morocco, and you are talking about cities like Tangier, Nador, any place that is near the EU borders, those cities have become no-fly zone for migrants. For days and nights, police would do raids, round up migrants, of course based on racial profiling, put the migrants into buses and ship them into these places. Like, for example, these are documented trajectories of migrants. One was arrested in Tangier, then he found himself a day later in Oujda, which is by the Moroccan-Algerian border. If overnight you are having a migrant is having a sandwich in northern Morocco, the next day is in Algeria. The second one is in middle Morocco, in the south of Morocco, that is around Dakhla, that is towards the Canary corridor. The second one is from northern Morocco back all the way to Niger. So these processes, particularly in the one in the middle, I find it very much interesting because these dispersal operations, most of the time, they've been either towards the Algerian borders, and it's very much interesting how, although Morocco and Algeria have almost no diplomatic relationships, and they never talk to each other. When it comes to migration, they have a more or less a cooperation. One of the cooperations is I would say necrodiplomacy. It is the exchange of dead bodies. When a dying migrant's body, an Algerian one, washes into Moroccan side or the other way around, in that case they talk. And the second the second conversation they have is what a migrant called football. Football conversation is, when I interviewed a migrant, he said that the Moroccans and the Algerians, they play football, and the migrants are the ball, in the sense that the migrants would take the Moroccans would take the Algerians, the migrants push them into the Algerians would push them back, and it keeps going back and forth for days until they manage a way out. But for me, the most important one is where migrants are deported from the extreme north of Morocco, approximately 800 away from EU borders, into the north, into cities like Agadir, where I reside. Agadir, a lot of times has been described as the dumping out for migrants, and we have this kind of policy of dumping ground in a lot of cases. For example, when there is like a city, the capital like Rabat, and there is a high-profile visit, and you have a lot of mentally ill people in Rabat, and they are a security risk. So what the government does most of the time is that it collects all the mentally ill people and just put them in a bus and put them in a small village somewhere. So people wake up in the morning with 100 or 200 mentally ill people just roaming in the streets. And the same thing has been happening in villages in southern Morocco, where you have predominantly non-Arab speaking Amazigh population, a region that is very rebellious, that is historically a migrant sending region. You have, out of the blue, you have hundreds and hundreds of migrants landing in these small towns, and a lot of times there has been a conflict between the two. Sometimes it has been a deadly conflict has been instances of deadly conflict between local populations and the migrants. Of course, it's very much interesting that the southern Morocco is the homeland of the small tomato that's being exported to most of Europe. So and most of the farm owners the farm managers are Spanish. So what the Spanish farmers did is that in the first beginning of the investment, they invested in middle Morocco. They depleted all the water resources, and they left the plastic houses, and they moved to the southern of Morocco. And most of the population that is employed in those farms are migrant populations. So that creates a kind of tense and animosity and conflict over resources. But most importantly, it puts the migrants in the south of Morocco near the Canary route. In parallel with this, what you have is denial of mobility, and a lot of time we have been talking about undeclared policy, where migrants are actually deprived from moving through the country, even with the legal permits and even with regular status, and has been something that people in the field talk about, but it was only released by someone who is not very careful in actually keeping official documents. He released a document that, based on the orders of Wali, or the Ministry of Interiors, it is prohibited to sell bus tickets to sub-Saharan migrants. Of course, what you mean by sub-Saharan migrants? Anyone who looks black. So once the people are deported from northern Morocco or dispersed from northern Morocco into southern Morocco, they are prohibited from going back. So they are practically funneled into staying or moving into the necrocorridor. So the following elements of why the Canary route, we call it a necrocorridor, is with regards to a lot of times there has been a lot of documented cases, and I have witnessed some in which there has been cases of migrants in duress, in urgent need for help. They sent their locations, but either to certain NGOs such as Al-Anfo and so on. But there is always this kind of shift of blame and shift to conflict over jurisdiction, and who should interfere and who should not enter the boat actually disappears. So this gray zone of who should provide help, whether the Spanish Coastal Guard or the Moroccan Coastal Guard or the Mauritanian Coast or the Senegalese Coastal Guard, which is also intervening in that part of, although it is part of the Moroccan national waters, is very problematic. The final element is with regards to the normalization of that. If you look at the Canary route, if you look at the beach of Labiyad, if you look at Wed Al-Ghazwa, which is a small beach in southern Morocco, every now and then, every week, you would have a dead body of a migrant washing to the shore. What happens is those bodies are simply collected, put in a morgue, and after that there is a silence policy. There is no follow-up. There is no attempt to outreach to the families of the migrants. Unlike in other cases, like in northern Morocco, where those incidents happened, there is more formal outreach to the embassy, to the diplomatic corps of the migrants to try to identify the body, to try to repatriate the body, and so on. So there is this making it business as usual. The death of migrants is just something procedural, something the body is just collected, put into the silence. And for me, this video is very important. It's not in southern Morocco. It's in Wajda, about the burial. I'm not sure if it's gonna play. So probably this is, for me, this is the very first documented funeral that is given to our migrants. Most of the time, the body is either buried anonymously with a number. The body of migrants, the migrant is either stays in a morgue for pretty long time until it's almost decomposed, or in a very rare case, there is a very minimal effort of repatriation of the dead body into home country. However, it's very interesting that if you look at the way Morocco managed this policy when it comes to, for example, receiving dead bodies of migrants Moroccan migrants from Algeria, or Moroccan migrants abroad, even here in Europe or even in Canada, the amount of effort that is being invested into facilitating, into providing the resources to repatriate the body and to provide proper human burial, let's say, what's the word? The burial, can I say operation? Okay.
In what sense?
The burial? When you mourn?
Okay. So the mourning, the burial, that same effort that Morocco invests when it comes to its own migrants, none of it is being done when it comes to, there is no even minimal effort in investing that. And I can give many examples. One of which is that there is one day, 10 bodies of migrants were in, I forgot the beach. It's beach between Dakhla and it's a small departure point. Labiyad, the white beach as they call it. 10 bodies of migrants washed away, and local NGO members tried to reach out to the diplomatic corps, and they prevented. At the same time, a couple of years ago, you had squatters in northern Morocco, where sub-Saharan migrants have taken houses of Moroccan diaspora, and because they had no housing. What happened in the first cases, Morocco was very active in involving the diplomatic corps of African countries, making sure we're going to evacuate these people from these houses. We want you to be a witness for this, so that we are not abusing these rights, and they mediatize the evacuation process. However, when it comes to receiving the dead bodies, or mediatizing the burial, or even making a minimal diplomatic outreach to the diplomatic corps or the family members of the dead migrants, none of it was established, because Morocco is not very much invested in making that death public or mediatized and so on. That's why if you look at, despite this, the number of deaths, or the rate of death that keeps taking place in these shores, if you look at the national, if you want to know about it, it's almost impossible for you to know about, because none of it is documented by the media. It's either very small local news outlets or local activists who are most of the time, kept on leash. However, if you look at the general discourse about migration in the country, it's most of the time is about is still stuck in the day of 2014 regularization. It's still regurgitating the discourse of European officials about Morocco being a pioneer in Africa, being the first country to have a humanist migration policy, about the first country to regularize African countries, African migrants, about number one country when it comes to soft power. So you have these parallel kind of images that do not match. A country that kind of boasts itself, celebrates itself, a humanist, champion of human rights, African migrants, South-South diplomacy, a regional leader in Africa, Africa's emerging big brother, but at the same time, those kind of nuances, the few tens of migrants, these are just bad noise. We want to tune down and move on to the next conversation. And I think that's what necropolitics is about. So I have some, do we still have more time?
If you can kind of summarize or plus the... Yeah, because we have maybe five minutes to...
Fine, okay. So methodology, okay, so probably... So I think this part of the country is very interesting to explore. It's not somewhere you can just go and collect data and come back. It's a space that requires slow research methodology, that requires going back to the field over and over instead of using this kind of extractive, non-engaging, non-participatory research method. So most of the time I would visit. I'm not supposed to receive a call. I don't have a network. So sorry for that. So for me, doing slow methodology instead of, because the situation is very fluid, is very evolving on daily basis, and it's very difficult to interview people because that's a hush-hush topic in the region, and it's very complicated. So I resort to slow research methodology, investigate, do a little bit of field work, semi-structured interviews. But probably I skip this to the preliminary findings. And I think the most important one is the paradoxes of invisibility. And the paradoxes of invisibility has to do also with the paradoxes of policies of invisibilization in Morocco. If you look at Morocco, we have a very restrictive migration policy, but the way it is implemented across the national territory is very different. For example, if you look at north of Morocco, there is a very severe policy of invisibilization. We don't want to see migrants in northern Morocco. We don't want to see what's called in Moroccan migration discourse, in the media discourse, migration candidates. Anyone who looks like he wants to, we're going to arrest them and shove them in, put them in a bus and put them, including even Moroccans, especially teenagers. And that applies to sub-Saharan migrants. If you look at the middle Morocco, like Rabat, Casablanca, there is the opposite. There is this policy of visibilization. Since it is the capital and the capital of African culture, we want to see migrants. We need the kind of tokenism, cosmetic multiculturalism. So migrants are not prohibited from showing in the public sphere. You can see them. They are on their own shop. There is a huge university campus, international campus for sub-Saharan students in the capital. But if you go to the south, then the policy of invisibilization goes again. So even there are thousands of crossings. When you go into the south of Morocco, you don't actually see the migrants. The moment you go down from Agadir, from the farms and from the fish factories, there are no migrants. Although they do exist. So there is a paradox of the fact that they do exist, and they do exist in thousands, but you don't see them. And that speaks not only of invisibilization, but also speaks of a very sophisticated infrastructure of smuggling that does not exist in northern Morocco, does not exist in southern Morocco, but only exists in the south of Morocco, because south of Morocco has very interesting paradoxes also in terms of securitization. There is a heavy militarization, but there is relaxed securitization in the sense that the area is geopolitically very important because we have conflict with Algeria there, but at the same time, so there is a military presence, but at the same time, the security presence is not very much there, in the sense that if you keep a low profile, nobody asks about you. That's why smuggling networks are very strong in that part of the country. And probably the invisibility is one of these, a small video of two. I've been in this Formula Word beach 2 days before this video was recorded, and I didn't see any migrants. So the next day, someone sent me the video that was on social media of a group of migrants, probably 90 or 50, carrying a huge boat, taking it to the beach from the village to the beach in the middle of the night. So in the same village you were in 2 days, you didn't see migrants, you have tens of migrants. So we can talk about the way migrants in southern Morocco approach the issue of visibility and visibility. And there's always been three strategies. You have the first one is conflict. You have cities in Casablanca and Rabat where there's small NGO human rights presence, where migrants have not really been accepting the policies of invisibilization that is imposed on them. So there was this kind of resistance, and sometimes it evolved into process of violence. Most of the time, these protests, they have been repressed and they did not succeed. The second strategy is a negotiation of sympathetic members of local communities, of NGOs, local NGOs, Christian NGOs, Christian churches, mosques, and so on. The third one, I think, is and this is the most successful. The third one is the one that's adopted in southern Morocco, which is adapt and total adoption of invisibility. The state wants you to be invisible. Do not resist the state. Do not try to reach to the local community to assert any form of right, but rather embrace the invisibility, keep a low profile until you move on to the Canary Island. So I think for me, the most important one is the relevance of criminal networking in this part, because if you trace what's happening in the Canary Islands, there is unlike any part of Morocco, in any part, even in North Africa, there is a heavy presence of criminal networks that are recruiting not just in Morocco, but they are spreading as into Senegal, Mali, and Niger, and Gambia. So the criminal network or smuggling networks in southern Morocco are quite active in recruiting people from all over Morocco into using the Canary Island, but also to all over from part of African countries. And I think part of that is what I call the escape. I interviewed a carpenter who is also named Mohammed, and he say, you see, Mohammed, many of the men you see around here, they are not here for the sun or the nice fish. They are here to lay low. Many have search warrants on them. They are not for serious reasons, not because they did not pay, most because they did not pay alimony or child support. They are here, so they are here. So you have this southern Morocco, because of the paradoxes of securitization, the heavy militarization that comes with relaxed security approach of letting people pass by, since we want that part of the country to be populated. So we're not going to be repressing people, impose a very severe approach that would make people leave the country. What that creates, it creates a land of fugitive. Everyone who runs from alimony, everyone who has a search warrant in parts of Morocco is residing in that part. And what that creates, it creates an escape for not just for criminals, but also for migrants who most of the time become victims of this public policy that displaces the migrants from the southern Morocco, from safer routes, into this kind of hornet nests, not just living there, but also after living there. So I think thank you. Thank you so much.
Sí, muchas gracias, Mohammed, por
Thank you so very much, Mohammed, for showing us this complexity of factors. It is true that these are issues that through the media we see them on the news in a normalized or a standardized way, and now we can analyze them through this new approach with these new factors and taking a look at the different policies that participate. I think that it was a very interesting conference. It took longer than expected, but I think it was worthwhile. And now we have time for Q&A, so whomever wishes to ask a question, we're ready to answer them right now. So anyone who would like to break the ice? Any aspect that you think that it could be interesting to consider?
Sí, no. Sí, mira allí.
We have a question. Good afternoon. I would like to ask a question. I come from Morocco, And I know how things are over there, but I would like to know about the legal situation of those migrants, especially those who come from Southern Africa, the Black Africa, as it's normally called, or Sub-Saharan Africa. Students who go there to study have no right, and their situation is very complicated. I don't know how is this regulated. Is it the same for everyone? What kind of strategies are being applied?
Si os parece, contestamos esta pregunta y luego mientras el resto se...
Maybe we can answer now these questions while you consider other questions.
Okay. Okay. So about the legal framework, I think there is a huge conflict between two legal frameworks, because we have two laws functioning together which do not make sense. Like, if you put them together, they seek to achieve two different things. You have, for instance, Law 0203, very restrictive one. You have the National Strategy for Migration Asylum. That's one. You have the regularization campaign. That's two. So if you are talking about this, the migrants, not the students. So for the irregular migrants. Since the National Strategy for Migration Asylum came in 2014, what happened is a kind of a general amnesty, where the migrants were given residency permits. The problem is that the one who gave the Ministry of the body that gave those permits was the Ministry of the Ministry of Migration. And when the Ministry of Migration was created, everyone was fighting to have it, because you have 6 other bodies that are responsible for managing migration. You have Ministry of Interior, you have Hassan Sagan Foundation for Moroccans residing abroad, you have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you have Majlis Jalia, and another one. So you have 4 bodies fighting who should own jurisdiction of the Ministry of Migration, and they keep fighting. At one point, it was reshuffled into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then at one point, the whole Ministry of Migration was dismantled. It was no longer available. So when what's called the Foreigners Office, through which the migrants got the residency permits, applied in 2017, when they wanted to renew the residency permit, they did not find a place to apply for. So it got stagnant. So what happened is that Morocco got this hail of, we did a regularization campaign, but okay, now that the permits are expired, what are we going to do with it? Nothing. So the problem is that we got the media coverage, we got the media hail and celebration, but the follow-up, nobody actually has been following what happened to those migrants, and what has been happening for those who have not been able to renew their residency permit. And the easy answer is they have been deported to the south of Morocco. And if you talk about the students, it's a different thing. So most of the students, and Morocco has a very interesting South-South cooperation policy, because in 2085, Morocco withdrew from the Organization of African Unity for certain reasons, but it did something very interesting. It always maintained bilateral exchange agreements with African countries. Yes, we withdraw from the Organization of African Unity, but we're going to maintain bilateral relationship with African countries. And one of the key focuses of bilateral exchange is educational exchange. Morocco has always been interested and has been always invested in promoting educational mobility. And so most of the students, African or Sub-Saharan African students, come to study in Moroccan university. They study for free. They receive free accommodation. They receive scholarship, and they receive administrative and academic support from an institution that was created by the king in 2019 for this particular purposes, which is l'AMSI, l'Agence pour la Coopération Internationale, the agency for Moroccan Agency for International Cooperation, for international cooperation. But the problem is that what happens once the students are at the university is very complicated. Once they are in the public space, they are subject to Law 0203, very restrictive. When they are in the educational space, there are multiple issues with regards to pedagogy, with regards to the equivalence, with regards to the years of the years of education, whether it's 3 years for the BA, 4 years. There are problems with regards to the language of education, because not all of Africa is francophone. Our education system is francophone. For example, something coming from something coming from let's say Nigeria. What the AMCA does is that they give them 6 months training in French and put them to study medicine. It's impossible for one who's just had six months training in French to study medicine with that. So there are problems with regards to educational attainment, with regards to integration inside, with regards to discrimination within the classroom even. So that's why we're working on a paper. I think it's coming on as a book chapter published by University of Florida. We called it Encouraged Mobility and Constrained Belonging. We want we want the students to come in, but we are not really much invested in promoting their integration. We want them to come to Morocco, to study, to have a positive image about Morocco, about this developed, supportive country, but nothing more than that.
Vale, sí, tenemos otra pregunta ahí.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so very much. I wanted to ask a question with regards to one thing that had been in the media here in Spain over the course of the last months, and it has to do with the presence of law enforcement agencies in Mauritanian and Senegal territory linked to migration control in this Atlantic route towards the Canary Islands. And if we take a look at the numbers of departures from Mauritania to the Canary Islands, the law enforcement presence there has achieved a drastic reduction of the figures. And this is creating a lot of concern because of the lack of transparency for the possible breach of human rights and so on and so forth. Obviously, Morocco is not going to upset having law enforcement agencies, Spanish law enforcement agencies in their own territory. But I understand that we need to have a good cooperation in the sea between the different Coast Guards agencies controlling the sea, both at the Canary Islands as well as in Morocco. Can we expect to see more information about this? Have you researched how this cooperation happens, if it happens? And with regards to the dissemination of people in the northern coast, because it is true that this corridor is based on the closure of the northern routes and on the Mediterranean. And the easiest, cheapest way of arriving to Spain is by plane. However, it is very difficult to consider a visa regime that is different from the restrictive one that we have in Europe. But I don't want to digress, but I was very much impacted by the map that you were showing about the dissemination of people from the Mediterranean coast of Morocco to northern Niger. And I wanted to ask if this is a deportation, an actual deportation that has done by road. And what has been the collaboration between law enforcement officials in Morocco to the Algerians one and to the Niger one, so that we can know what's this necro-cooperation between states that can be truly interesting. And one more thing, since we're talking about Algiers, and apologies because I'm taking a lot of the floor, but in Spain we're hearing a lot about the reopening of the route between Algiers to the Balearic Islands. Seems like the Mediterranean was very much closed, but it seems like we're having some arrivals to the Balearic Islands, and maybe this is linked to the new geopolitical issues linked to the position that Spain has with regards to Western Sahara. Is this a thing that is being debated in Morocco? What is your approach to this?
Entendido bien.
Did you understood the three questions? So did you get the interpretation? Hopefully you did.
So, the first question, I think the conversation between Morocco and the EU with regards to like restricting the borders has gone beyond like foot on the ground. It's more about the technical know-how, the equipment, and so on. But I think what combines all your questions is that if you want to really understand what, like, how, like, if you look at every like very impactful border control operation that has been conducted within Morocco, you would always notice that it coincides either with the release of a substantial amount of money from the EU, or some quarrel between the EU and that country. So that's probably that pertains to your Algeria question. So for Morocco, the conversation has gone because for example, in 2014, 2016, the EU. The conversation that the EU wanted to have with Morocco is the deportation or the repatriation of third country nationals. So, and Morocco at that time was very adamant in saying, so the point was that it's like the Dublin Agreement, the fingerprint. So the conversation that Morocco, the EU wanted to have is that anyone who has been through Morocco and is caught somewhere in Europe would have been repatriated back to Morocco, and there's been a lot of pressure on Morocco to actually accept that agreement. And Morocco has been very creative in that, because when the regularization campaign regularization campaigns were initiated at that time, there was this huge worry that too many migrants would want to apply for the residency. So one of the strategies to actually prevent many people from actually applying and having this huge load of processing that many number of migrants with such international focus was that within the migrant communities there were rumors that Morocco will sign the agreement the moment that they submit for regularization. So a lot of people who were afraid that their fingerprints will be collected in Morocco, they did not submit the request for regularization. So I don't think that Morocco is in any position to negotiate with regards to having like EU policemen in the territory, because it's not about human capacity. It's not about having the equipment. It's not about having the logistics. It's mostly about having the political will to actually mobilize the resources, and that's something that Morocco at this point is not really much invested in. If you look at, for example, the south of Morocco, there is increasing signs of cooperation, but not as much as it has been happening. For example, a couple of months ago, the Ministry of Interior in Morocco announced that starting from Agadir until Agub, a huge distance, that fishermen who used to spend the night fishing was prohibited from all of those coasts at night. So you could only do fishing because it was then the next month cameras were installed on across all the coastal line. So it's not about the resources, it's not about the availability of resources, the availability of technical know-how, as much as it is the availability of political will, because once you block that route, what Morocco will have is what we are having now, which is a very rise of xenophobic. There is a huge social media campaign now called No to Africans in Morocco. Very kind of xenophobic, conspiracy, anti-George Soros, replacement theory kind of discourse, and this is gaining ground in Morocco. So even if Morocco provided that Morocco has the capacity to curb that, to block that route, and it does block it, what's going to happen next is increased numbers and more pressure on the Mediterranean routes, and you would have a huge accident like it happened in 2024. Huge bodies that nobody wants to claim. So Morocco is not really invested. So it's like it's like you have a water and you release and you tighten. You cannot block it all the time, but you keep release pressure and release pressure. You do not play all the. It's not like it's a one-time solution. It's just depending on how the situation evolves. Morocco can either collaborate or not collaborate. If you develop all the infrastructure and you deploy it, then you commit to it, and Morocco does not want to commit to it.
Sí, pues cogemos un par de preguntas más aquí.
Okay, a couple more questions. Hi. Yes, I wanted to ask you if there has been a change in the public opinion or in the language being used by the media in Morocco regarding migration, especially compared to what we see in Europe or specifically in Spain. For instance, in Spain, we are seeing a change since the migratory crisis, in inverted commas, of 2015. We see a change in the language used towards migrants. For instance, the way that the migrant situation is presented now is different. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the general image or the general discourse in the media were the fact that when a migrant arrived to a beach, we would help them out. That was the idea. However, last summer, for instance, videos became viral of migrants arriving to the coast in Spain, and instead of helping them, the tourists, they were tripping them, making sure that they fell, whilst others were calling the police forces. So there's a change in the mindset of people. Is that happening also in Morocco? What's the public image of that you have of migrants in Morocco? How do the media, the public media, see, or what language do they tend to use in terms of migrants? Could you clarify that? Has it changed or not? Has there been a shift in the discourse in the media regarding migrants?
I think Morocco is a country that's walking with two speeds. We always say that. So it's like there are always contradictions. You would see a huge fancy building in front of a shanty town. This kind of contradictions, and you would see it also in terms of discourse. You would have the high level leadership of the country is pro migration, is pro mobility, is pro South-South migration, South-South cooperation, and we have. This is part of a strategic realization that we, as Morocco, we have. When King Mohammed VI came to power, we had this hope of joining the EU, the European, like we're going to be part of the EU and all of that. And that dream has been shattered, and Morocco has realized that we cannot put all our eggs in the European basket. We need to diversify, and part of the diversification is opening towards Africa. Our trade exchange with Africa is always in favor of Morocco. We export to African countries, to Senegal, Mali, Niger, way more than we import, and that's the reverse of that happens. So Morocco needs to maintain a positive image among African countries. That's one. If you look at the lower social strata, of course, there is always this rise of hate there is this social media campaign about blocking marriage between Moroccans and Africans, where like people whenever they would find a case of marriage between a Moroccan man and the sub-Saharan African or the other way around, there is a huge sarcasm and bullying against those people. And I think there are multiple cases of that across the world. So I think this because of the rise of competition over jobs and so on, the rise of visibility in the public sphere, and also the lack of awareness. A country that has not been migrant receiving has never been actually a migrant receiving country for very long. And especially in rural areas that have been very much isolated, that have never been exposed to a foreigner even a Moroccan outsider, let alone someone coming from sub-Saharan Africa and resided there. So I think there is this backlash against migrants. But I think it's very interesting that we have been discussing an anti-discrimination law in Morocco since 2017, but it has not been adopted. And there are a couple of reasons of that for why we don't want to have an anti-hate speech law, because that would send. Because if you adopt it, then you would have a lot of Arabs you would use it to target people who would make. In your idea, you would assume that a lot of people who would make anti-African migrants discourse will be affected by that law, but people who will be affected by it is people within the current government, former governments, who are Arabs and who are making very discriminatory, derogatory comments against the Berber population, the Amazigh. So you have those contradictions, but I think Morocco has a very interesting incident that happened at the end of the Africa Cup final. There is a university professor at a huge international university in Rabat. She made a very discriminatory comment about Senegalese audience, discriminatory, and she was suspended. This has never happened in Morocco. I think it sets, although we don't have I still don't understand the legal framing of why they fired her, because legally they can't, according to the Moroccan law, since we do not have. I'm not familiar with the legal technicalities of it, but the fact that something was done, it signals something to the wider community that this kind of discourse will not be allowed, and people would be very much interested. I think in a small town called. In the center of Morocco, a person was arrested for making derogatory comments against sub-Saharan migrants in his town. So I think there is a rising anti-migrant discourse, but I think there is also a rising concern from the state to repress that kind of discourse, because it's bad. It's bad, and it's bad for business in both ways.
Si os parece,
Maybe another question? Let's have one more question, and then we conclude. Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. I'm very interested in what you explained about necropower and how the state systematizes or normalizes the deaths of migrants, and how you manage corpses that are never identified in the end. I would like to know how the families of those who disappeared, how can they maybe complain to the state, because there's no identification of those bodies that just appear. Could the families somehow go against the state for that, given this non-identification of corpses? And then we conclude. I don't know. Would you like to answer? If you could answer that question, and then we'll go on.
I think sometimes, given that it's hard to identify the body, it's hard also to identify who to blame. I mean, which government? You see, I mean, but let's assume the body is identified. That resolves the issue of identification. At the end of in the process of the shock, of the trauma, I think families, they move beyond the issue of accountability to just looking for a sense of closure, to just seeing or knowing whether their family member has died what might be called a good death versus a bad death. I think for the families, I think this sense of closure, I want to know how my son died, is more important than, for them, is more important than the context or who is the culprit in that. I think families are more oriented to looking for closure than they are into assigning responsibility.
Marta, Tomás, tú querías.
Marta?
So many things, but there were a couple of things that you mentioned that I wanted to emphasize, and one is about your methodology, I really appreciate your slow research approach. I mean, that's probably the only way you can do this, but that is not always the case. We as researchers sometimes operate on very pressuring time frames with very low budgets, and I mean, you can feel that you have taken the time, you have managed to, as you say, build trust and not just kind of parachute yourself and get the information as quickly as possible. So I really appreciate that. You mentioned a couple of times the actual smugglers, human traffickers. At one point you said that the category of human traffickers doesn't exist. And I wanted to, I would like you to talk more about who's behind this, because we move in this image of really evil people. They're the really bad ones, right? And I think there's also a very complex story to tell behind those who are aiding to just set the route and allow people to move, right? But yeah, that might be another topic of research. I wanted to thank you anyway. Not sure if you're going to have time to respond, but we have time.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay. So about human trafficking, I think from the Moroccan perspective, I think there are two very good mistakes to make that the Moroccan does. The first one is, even in its conceptualization of the human trafficking law, the terminology of migrant smuggler and human trafficker, two different things, both bad, but completely different situations and different crimes, but most of the time they are just mixed together. And that mixture is not just stupid, it's intentional. It plays on the level of statistics, because we are accountable to foreign donors and outside institutions, including the UN. So we need to kind of inflate the numbers, and we can only do that by
putting these categories together.
Exactly. But for example, I was interviewing someone who he tried a couple of times and he failed, and he was talking about the process of his arrest, and he said the first time when we were arrested by the border control, the first question was asked is, who is the captain? They are not interested in who survived. They want the captain, because that captain is going to be charged for human trafficking. So there's this business of inflating the human trafficking, of creating this huge monster called human traffickers, because whenever there is a tragedy, it's not us, it's not the Morocco, it's not the EU, it's the human trafficker. Although sometimes they do not exist. It's only a smuggler, not a human trafficker. But I think we kind of create a monster out of mixing terminology, conflating statistics to deflect the responsibility of the actual actors who are in the field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some questions about the socioeconomic part, but I don't know if to continue or we are going to sort our audience. No, because I was thinking that I don't know if you saw the news, we are in a moment where Spain is going into a process of massive regularization of immigrants now. And I was thinking that there are a lot of parallelisms between, in a way, Spain also and Morocco as initial migrant. We were a country that we were sending migrants to outside to work, and then we are receiving immigrants, and also the different dynamics and also problems of xenophobia and different, and also the socioeconomic part of it, that in the late years there has been recognized how part of the migrant work is responsible of the growth in the Spanish economy. In comparison, we are having a kind of completely different policy to the one of other, not only European countries, but countries around the world, no? So I'm wondering, with this kind of evolution you have been talking about in Moroccan not only government policies or society. If you see this case where you see, because the immigrants in the south also are working, as you said, in the agriculture and the fishing industry, and if you see any kind of going towards kind of recognizing that, not only seeing them as competing with the local communities, but if you see somehow that not only for their geopolitical reasons in terms of their relationship with Africa, but also in terms of recognizing their contribution to Moroccan economy, if you see that coming, or you see any change in that regard. It's still early for that.
I think it depends. Like, there are different regions in the country, and there are some really, like, if you spread the map, and you could also connect that to the recent national census. But if you look at the map, you have, for example, I can name few towns in central, northern, and south of Morocco where there has been like really interesting and captivating stories of kind of cooperation between the local community and the migrants. Probably the names would not be relevant, but for example, I can mention a small city called Tiznit and a small town called Khmiseit Amira. And the dynamics, so in those towns, although Tiznit is what's called in Morocco the silver city, is famous for jewelries that are made of silver. Well, for some reason, there has always been conflict between migrants and the local community in that small city. If you look at the other small village, which is Khmiseit Amira, it is harmonious. There are cases of intermarriage between local population, although it's a population that has been very much secluded and closed for a very long time. We are talking about a mountainous, very poor, rebellious, migrant-sending regions that now are receiving hundreds of migrants, but at the same time, one has been accommodating and one has been not. And I've always been interested in looking at why. Why is it that in this one there is harmony and there is collaboration in this one? And I could connect two things. One thing is that when it comes to this small city, is that what happened initially is that in the small village, the migrant communities started arriving slowly, one by one. It was not an outcome of displacement by the government as much as it was an operation by a personal choice by the migrants themselves, who found a job, made personal contact, got to know the someone in the local population, and they settled there. And the other one, it was an outcome of those dispersal operations, because there is another big city that is led by a stronger mayor. When they wanted to deport him to the city, the stronger mayor said no. So they found the little guy with the small city. So I think it has to do with time. So I think the city, one of the cities had time to absorb and to manage differences, while the first time, the second city, the change was very abrupt. So I think with time, I think Morocco is going to be negotiating all of these differences, all of these conflicts, and so on. Hopefully.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias de nuevo.
Well, thank you very much again, Professor. It's been really interesting to have this connection, and thank you very much to all the participants for following this interview. Thanks to the interpreters. I don't know if it was easy or complicated. Hopefully they didn't suffer very much. And we invite you next February 12th to come to the next session of the cycle with Christian Muller. We're going to be talking about law and Islamic practices, and we invite you to come to the next exhibition that is going to open this week with an Iranian author, Hanis, and we can't wait to see you again. Thank you very much.